Hi, my name is Lisa Galdino, and I'm based in San Francisco, California. I work for a Head Start program here in San Francisco as a talent development specialist.
Hi, Lisa. Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast. I'm really excited to have you speak more about your work at Head Start, and what brought you to the work and what excites you about engaging with young learners and yeah, and how your local environment, like the geography, right, being in San Francisco informs the kind of learning environments that you provide and yeah, I think there's a lot to unpack with that. And, your experiences abroad as well, as I know that you've done a lot. And, I want to unpack that together. So yeah, I'd like to begin with this question that I always ask my guests. It's basically a rundown of what led you to this very moment in the work that you're doing. So if you can maybe share about your professional background, kind of what were some of the motivating factors that led you to do, education work and how you found yourself at a place like Head Start. So is that okay?
Yes, sure. So I have been working in Head Start for the past 2 years, but in the early childhood field for I think around 14 years. Primarily as a teacher. And just in this past 2 school years, I have stepped out of the classroom and I'm now working with teachers kind of on their professional development and helping them with some of their career advancement within our organization. So it's something completely new for me. But as far as early childhood, I didn't ever intend on entering the early childhood field, although my mother ran a family child care center in our home when I was a child, when I was around 6 years old. I was sick a lot as a child and I had multiple ear infections. She was working in center-based care and she kept getting fired from jobs because they said that her attendance was not good and she had a sick child. So, kind of as a means to fight that, she said, I'm just opening my own family childcare. And my mom is from the Philippines. She immigrated to the US in the late 80s. And she was still working on her English and really just decided I'm going to open this daycare center for a place for my child and to be able to combine both of the my job and my career and my family in one place. And so I never intended on doing it, but I went to school at UC Santa Barbara and actually studied East Asian studies. And then just didn't really know what I wanted to do. I kind of thought maybe someday I will be a translator. At the time, my Mandarin Chinese was pretty good. Now, not as much, but and then went on to do my master's and in developmental psychology. I had taken a few child development classes and just really became found that I was passionate about early childhood and children and really protecting this foundational time period in everyone's life, childhood.
Amazing. Wow. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. It sounds like a really formative moment in your life and your mom's life came with this family child center. And I also wanted to mention that, myself personally, as a child, I also had a lot of ear infections. And my mom said that one of the doctors joked, saying that there should be this long tube from my ear all the way back to our house because of how many times we'd have to go back and forth
Oh my
because I
God.
was always having to get like liquid like taken out or something. So when you said that immediately, I was like, wow, that's real, and that's so demanding for the family. And the fact that your mom took it upon herself to say, hey, I'm going to start my own business and really create a solution out of nothing is tremendous. So and she's an immigrant, like you said, from the Philippines. I'd love
Yeah,
to
yeah.
hear a little bit more, since it sounds like she was a big influence on you. If you can share a bit more about, about your mom, maybe in terms of like how she was able, like what were certain values that she had that kind of made for you know, a successful family child center, and what were certain actions that she did that you observed and felt, wow, that's, that's admirable, right? That's she's really taking care of these youth. So I'm sure that there's something there that ties into the work that you've been doing up until now.
Yes, absolutely. And even as a young child, I would watch, kind of observe how she interacted with families and the kind of one-on-one individual connections and that she gave them. And I I felt like, wow, she's really good, really good at allowing people to trust her and to share her kindness. And every family was going through different things. A lot of the families in the daycare were from Europe and were in San Francisco temporarily working at UCSF as scientists. So even at that age, I was exposed to people from many different cultures and backgrounds and communities. And I think as I was growing up helping her in the daycare, I just really felt like this time, like again, like this time period in children's lives, also in families' lives, is so fundamental. And I, watching her, found that I could have a role in that, in supporting families and helping them, overcome all of their obstacles and building a strong base with a community uh, from a young age, like children at a young age.
And how long did your mom run this family child center?
She ran it for about 10 years, most of the time period that I was growing up until I was in middle school. And I played more of a role later on, reading to the children, and it just was such an amazing part of my life and the community that we created, and it sparked that I can have a role in building these relationships with families.
Yeah, actually, I was gonna ask you that question of, oh, did you support in any way? And yeah, you were saying that you would read to the children and probably, and other functions as well, just kind of be part of that community. And I love what you shared about how your mom was so trusted, by the parents. I think that's crucial in any kind of like, school environment. That trust is everything. And that she was able to look at each parent in this kind of one-on-one interaction and really hear them out. And parenting a struggle, and especially if you're coming from a very far away place to be at a university, like you said, as was the case for a lot of them. That there's a lot of anxieties that come up. So yeah, I think it's evident that your mother was able to really hold space with these parents and assure them that their children were getting the best quality, care and support. So when it comes to, the work that you did in supporting your mom for those, 10 years, I'm just curious if there's like a particular experience that maybe comes to mind at first, that could be from reading a story, but it could be something totally different, but that really kind of stays with you, that maybe you hold as like a very positive memory of like, wow, this is what it was all about. And again, was that spark of you wanting to continue this work in education? Because I mean, it's not always rainbows and sunshine and everything's great. It can be a grind sometimes, and it can be tough. But clearly you've endured that and decided that this is where your energies should be dedicated to. So yeah, I'm just curious if any experience stands out.
I think not a particular experience necessarily, but again, like just really being a part of it. Like, and we were a family that connected with other families, and I just I felt like they became so integrated into our own personal lives, and we were attending those children's birthday parties and things like that. And I I saw those relationships being built, and I really, felt that. And also, like, my mom didn't have a background in early childhood either. She had no really training. As I look back on it now, a lot of the things that she was doing is actually some of the you know approaches that I studied, and in terms of making families feel seen, you know, just really fundamental, simple ways to connect. That she, I always came back to those aspects that she did, from the daycare. So I can't pinpoint like one exact memory, but just how it ran, how she ran the daycare, how everything was by word of mouth. There was no marketing, there was no social media. And yet she had a waiting list for 10, 15, 20 families who wanted to be in the daycare because they had heard of this community that she had created. And I just found that so inspiring, even at a very, very young age.
It just sounds that, what your mom did together with you, and then all the families there. It just sounds like, you know, there was such heart, right, in that, and that's what really built up that trust that formed those bonds of kind of like feeling that this is a genuine family, right? That they're really looking out for us. And yeah, and I think the fact that there was no marketing or all of that fancy stuff to kind of get in the way of like the genuine sense of like people really are drawn to individuals like your mom. So it's wonderful to hear that. And yeah, there's certain things that you can't really learn in a textbook or in a school setting, like, right, that
Absolutely.
you're doing a degree for having the most compassionate heart. It's like, I don't, yeah. So I mean that's wonderful. And I'm sure, from our interactions and our own friendship, I know that you've also, gained the same heart as your mother, because of how compassionate you are, and yeah, and how you carry yourself too. So just know that, the influence, it's always back and forth with, what those experiences were and then kind of who you are today.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I also wanted to ask a little bit more about, maybe this notion or this feeling that you had of, well, okay, I just did my undergrad, and I'm thinking about what my career might be. And you said that you were thinking about being a translator, because you knew Mandarin. Um, you mentioned your mom is Filipino, but like then
Yes.
you know like Mandarin. So kind of could you explain a little bit like where does that fit into your story? Did you just like, yeah, where did you learn Mandarin? Where did that
Yeah.
come from?
Yes, it's kind of an odd pairing. There's a school here in San Francisco that is a Chinese language immersion school, that my parents really liked. They wanted me to learn another language, but it didn't necessarily have to be Chinese, but they really, really liked this school. And it was kind of an up and coming new school at the time. There were only 12 kids in my middle school graduating class, and I was accepted into the school in sixth grade. And so in that school, it was an immersion school. I learned Mandarin, and transferred to a actually French language immersion school for high school, but continued my Mandarin. So I had around 8 years of Chinese before I entered college and continued Mandarin for the first 2 years of college. And so that's kind of where the language came from. And I found that I really was inspired by learning about this different culture, in addition to also learning about my mom's culture, and then had an opportunity to study abroad in Beijing, China, for 3 months for a summer education abroad program. And I really felt like I wanted to utilize the language. A lot of people who look like me don't necessarily speak Mandarin. So I found that when I went to Beijing, people would ask me, "Oh, where are you from?" And I would say, "Oh, I'm, from America. I'm from San Francisco." And some of them made assumption and asked me, "Oh, you have darker skin. Do you come from Africa?" And I said, "Oh, no." And it was just like a great opportunity to have like a kind of cultural exchange. And once they found out I spoke Mandarin, um, they just opened up to speak to me. And that's kind of where the language derived from. And it's funny now in my Head Start program, it's a program that has primarily Asian American teachers and around 80 to 90% Asian families. So I do use my Mandarin with teachers often, and it really hasn't gone away. It's just something that I've carried with me into this new role as well, in combination with early childhood and all of the schooling that I had later on to learn more child development theory.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And such wisdom that your parents had from a very early, like when you were in an early age to say, I want my child to learn another language, a second language. Um, did you ever ask your parents why that was the case, where that came from?
I think it was the school. I mean, they also, they thought it was kind of like a bonus to be able to learn a second language. And Chinese is very useful in San Francisco, as well as Spanish, but they felt that it would be a really important thing to have.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And I think that this language opened up another culture and allowed you to gain trust with the people who speak that language as well. And I know from my own experience, being living in Brazil, knowing the language really helped to build friendships and to show that you were not there just as like a passing tourist, right? Ignorant tourist, right? Or just kind of there to have a certain experience the way you want and then to kind of leave. But this, yeah, desire to like recognize them, right? And to acknowledge the fact that these cultures are complex, and for them certain things they just take for granted and it's normal. But then when they see someone from a faraway place that's grappling with it, or trying to like say a word, and for me, I wasn't, I didn't grow up speaking Portuguese, so a lot of it was like just learn quick, kind of trial by fire, and it led to like really new insights about how I would view something, like the same object or the same scenario, and I would use different words, and they would be like, so it was that cultural exchange, like you said, that led to like these aha moments. But continuing that and being able to apply that in a professional capacity, I think is so valuable. And I feel like I'm like a broken record player at this point. I keep saying the word trust, but you're saying that you have these teachers who are Asian American, and they speak Chinese, and so there's like it's almost like a direct line to kind of what they're feeling, and they can like put their guard down a little bit to share out, and yeah, that's so important. So I hope that you realize how much of that is like, yeah, a superpower of like building trust and compassion for your colleagues.
Yes.
Definitely. Yeah. Do you know any other languages? Did you pick up any French at that high school immersion program?
I did not because I continued on the Mandarin track.
Okay.
But as you mentioned before, my husband is from Brazil, and I met him in a first graduate school program in Canada, in Toronto. Um, and then we married, and I ended up moving to Curitiba, Brazil, a few years later, and spent a while there teaching English.
Nice.
So I understand more Portuguese than I speak. But yes, another language is in my life.
That's so awesome. So yeah, you also have experience not only living abroad in China, but also Canada and Brazil. Oh my gosh, Lisa, you're like a world traveler. So, what was it like being in those different countries? Like, I know with Canada, it's often, kind of pointed out that it's not all that different compared to the US, just, in terms of maybe language, in terms of like, yeah, shared kind of histories that they're right there, right next to each other. But still, right, there were things that kind of caught your attention, I would imagine. Maybe a Tim Hortons was one of them. That's like, like franchise with like coffee and donuts. Um, but yeah, what are some things like that maybe you could point out from your experience in living in Canada, and then also in Brazil? Like, were there any like commonalities in terms of how you had to adapt to that different place?
I think in Canada, the biggest thing that I found, I was born and raised in San Francisco, and it's pretty known as a diverse city. We have pockets of different areas of the city that are kind of known for like specific racial communities. And it exists. You can find like Latinos in like Mission District and Chinatown, and but I when I got to Canada and spent time living in Toronto, I felt, oh, this is really like what a real melting pot is, because it's not laid out the same way as San Francisco in my personal experience. I felt that the different neighborhoods had certain, cultural backgrounds of the majority of people, but it really felt like different racial groups mixed in a very genuine way. And we're really seeking to learn about other cultures. Not so much, oh, we want to stay with our group of people. And I am biracial. My mother is from the Philippines, my father is Black. And so I've always kind of floated between groups, and I felt really good in Canada being able to like visit different neighborhoods. There's a ton of street festivals in the summer that celebrate every culture that you can think of. And I just couldn't help but feel it felt more genuine, even than San Francisco. So that really, really stood out to me. Curitiba, I was very foreigner, so I was the one that was kind of different. It's not a city that has so many tourists, although people know it. But people don't know that it's cold there often, and sometimes colder than San Francisco. And there is no beach. So people are often wearing jackets and sweaters, and there's a joke that sometimes people are maybe considered less warm than other places, although I've found that not to be true when you get to know people. It's just the weather is cold.
Oh, that's yeah, that's very interesting, and I think it makes total sense why you were really like drawn to the hmm, well, the community that you found in Toronto, and the fact that, there was so much diversity there, but in a different way. The way you described San Francisco sounds very similar to Los Angeles, because they're more of like ethnic enclaves, if you really think about it. There's these groupings, right? And it's known by the names of like the little towns. Right? We have like Little Tokyo, and we have a Chinatown, and same thing. But yeah, with Toronto, the way you described it, it sounds a lot more. Um, I mean, yeah, melting pot is one way of saying it, but just like harmonious, they just
Right.
they're open to like getting to know each other and to like share in that sense. So that's really wonderful. And yeah, when you talked about Curitiba, I've actually never been to Curitiba. I lived in Brazil for 6 years, and that was always on the list of places I wanted to go and visit, but I have yet to do so. But I did hear that it can get pretty chilly. I also hear that
Yeah.
people like to ride their bikes a lot. Did you have a bike in
I,
Curitiba?
I did not, but yes, many
Okay.
people do.
Yeah. Okay.
It's very,
Great.
very green.
Yeah. Very green as well. Yeah, that's wonderful. So you've had were you also teaching in Toronto?
No, I was doing my master's
Ah,
program in developmental psychology, and I worked a little in a nonprofit, but it didn't have anything to do with early childhood,
okay,
although
development.
it was in education.
Yeah. And then that's kind of from there moving to Brazil, then would you say that teaching in Brazil was like the first, I mean, I don't like to, I don't want to say like first professional experience as a teacher because you did so much work with your mother, and I would count that as part of education for sure. But would you say that's kind of like what got you, you know, into the teaching space? Because it was like, oh, I did this master's, I have this background, and then going to Brazil with your husband, you're like, okay, I can teach. Was that more or less the rationale?
Yeah, actually, prior to moving to Canada, I did teach at a preschool, a Jewish community preschool for 3 years. And then I kind of finished there and then wanted to do actually two schools and then moved to Canada shortly after. So I did have classroom experience, but I wasn't like a lead teacher. It was very newbie in an actual like school setting outside of like family childcare and I did gain a lot of experience but in Brazil was teaching uh children until adults in a very small English school, private English school there.
I see. Yeah. So you've already had experience, but you know, the the jump to like being in a all Brazilian school, right? Like knowing your students, knowing the local culture, I mean, so important. So I'm sure that there were certain challenges that you might have faced with like them really wanting to hear more Portuguese and you being like, but this is an English class. I know I felt that way. A little bit of
Yeah.
a tension of like, how much Portuguese should I use? Or can I use? Because I was very limited in the beginning. But teaching is all about, negotiating space and trying to learn more about the needs of your students as well. So, I mean, I think just in an international space, it gets a little bit more complex, because you're just like, it's so new. Um, but yeah, no, this is great. I wanted to ask a question a little bit more specific now to global citizenship. So, it's very clear that, your background, in your background, you have come across, different kinds of communities. And in some ways, the community that you described over, with the family child center, it's kind of like the world kind of just coming to you. And then there's this process of you going out into the world, right? To do your master's in Toronto, and then going to Brazil, and then coming back to the States. So, from those different experiences, I'd be curious to hear about how you think about this concept of global citizenship. And, it doesn't have to be a full definition. It could just be, a couple words just to get us started. But how does that kind of, how do you think about this term? And would you say that um, yeah, that you've considered it often?
I feel like when I hear the term, I think about the importance of being curious, and we come into the world in one place and with our own background, but then just really trying to be curious about other people's perspectives and like getting out of our own zone, like intentionally, and trying to think like my world is kind of small. Like there's many other worlds that people like spaces that people live in, and I think that being a global citizen is kind of seeking understanding, like greater understanding of other people's worlds and how they live. And you may not necessarily agree with everything that other ways, but really connecting to people's humanity is key. And connecting to people's humanity kind of allows you to widen your own perspective and really grow as well. And because we're all really connected.
I love that. That was wonderful. I agree with everything that you just said, because I do think that it requires us to have this curiosity. That's kind of like the initial step, like that somewhat timid step at first of getting out of one's comfort zone. And then it's about this ongoing process of kind of pushing that boundary, right? This, as you said, seeking greater understanding and also recognizing the fact that our bubble, right, the world that we inhabit, is just one reality. And it's a valuable one, of course, but there's so many other different bubbles and realities that we can also explore. And I've seen this with little kids playing with bubbles, but one bubble and another bubble, when they get close enough, they kind of like boop, kind of merge together, and now you got a bigger bubble. So perhaps things, work out in that way where you're kind of in this state of expanding and learning more about the world. But I also do know that getting out of one's comfort zone is very uncomfortable. Sometimes it can be um, painful, even. So, what would you have to say to someone, where you're encouraging them to be a global citizen, but you're telling them, but you're going to have to struggle, and it might be painful or frustrating at times? Um, how would you convince someone, about that kind of difficult, necessary step? Because n not everyone might want to do that.
Right. Yeah, I think it is hard, and acknowledging that it is hard and everyone comes at different levels, with how comfortable they are, but I really think, like, your level of vulnerability towards being able to share yourself to others first really opens it for them to trust to be able to share with you. So kind of like what you give, you gain back equally, you know? And so, working towards to being like your kind of truest self, really can help to kind of combat that fear of, I don't know. And that has helped me traveling into new spaces with new languages and wanting to connect and not really feeling worried that, oh, I don't know if people will understand me. But the more that I could, really be open, people reciprocated that too.
All right. Wow. Thank you so much. Yeah, when when you talked about vulnerability, I think that's such a crucial piece to all of this. And really kind of peeling back these, layers of like who really am I in my genuine sense and myself, my selfhood. And then you mentioned this kind of phrase of like what you give, um, you gain back equally. And perhaps, maybe it's equally, but maybe it's even more than even anticipated. I think that's the crazy thing about how that yeah, this is difficult work to be able to seemingly put yourself on the line by showing that true authentic self. Um, but then to see the ripple effect that that has on your environment and how it actually comes back, you know, even tenfold, really. It should reinforce a different kind of perception of why it's important to get out of one's comfort zone. Because I mean, from what I'm hearing, and also I think this ties to my belief too, but it's not about just you, right? It's about all of us. And then you mentioned this word, but the connectedness of us all, right? I think that plays into this notion of global citizenship, don't you think? Like, maybe if you could speak
Yes.
a little bit more about what does connectedness mean in this context?
Yes, and that the differences exist, but that we are all, you know, truly challenging together, kind of. And I think just in relation to my work as a teacher, when I was, working with kids, I found it really important to have kids understand that too. Even try to understand that from a very, very young age, that we're here in San Francisco, but there are kids in other countries that, are experiencing different things, but you are inherently still connected to them. So if you see kids suffering there, we can still do things here in our space to help them, communicate with them. We could do that in, a project or and many different ways to manifest, but to really have children like build that compassion from very, very young ages and modeling that for them, I had to start like with myself and my experiences. And I feel that it's very important for kids to for kids to be able to start to do that from a really young age. And I helped, bridge between that connection in my classroom, in my teaching. It was something really important to me.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the population that you work with, right? Like early childhood education and like, kind of is it kindergarten?
Preschool. So
Preschool. Okay.
actually, we do start at infant 0 to age 5.
Wow. Yeah. So we're talking babies, babies. Yeah. So starting so early, it's clear that they are most malleable, right? Um, and that, to really like model these attitudes and to engage them in these big questions, right? That in many ways kind of elude the grasp of a lot of adults and thinking, oh, faraway people suffering, like not my problem, right? But to really instill that, I think is so important. And is that partly the reason why you enjoy working with such young learners? Could you speak a little bit about yeah, like the potential within the classroom for 0 to 5, because it's a space that I personally have never really stepped into as a teacher, so it's really quite new to me. Although I do understand that yeah, they're very impressionable and they're like sponges, right? But yeah, maybe could you speak about yeah your particular passion
Yes.
for zero to
Yeah.
five?
I just think that 0 to 5 is impressionable, but also it's kind of they form all of their beginnings of self-esteem and their identity and who they are and all of those things that teachers guide and support and help children build those positive feelings of self. And maybe teachers, as children grow up, they often forget those teachers because they're too young to remember who they are often. But I feel that it's very, very crucial that teachers understand how powerful the early ages are. And a lot of the times, people think early childhood, there's this kind of association with babysitting, but like how critically and foundationally again important um, an early childhood teacher is, and really transformational also for families when you have teachers say, you're doing a good job as a parent, and family, it really can change trajectories. And as I also spent a time in New Zealand in a study tour there, and I remember entering an infant toddler center, and the teacher there said, teachers there who teach infants have most of them have a master's degree before they even step in to teach like a baby. And then they also have to go through a period of like an internship as well. And it's just very different here in US how early childhood teachers are regarded. And so I really I feel that it's very pivotal, and we need to bring more awareness to the importance of early childhood teachers, and also like training early childhood teachers to have a positive sense of self themselves. In as a teacher, you are a teacher, you are an educator, and giving teachers the confidence now in my role. I'm really kind of thrust into this one-on-one building teachers' confidence, which then trickles down to the children.
Yeah, wow. I really appreciate you sharing this because again, I feel like I don't know. And I also don't have children myself. So it's all quite new, but it now seems very clear. Like of course this would be like some of the most, if not the most important years of their life developmentally, right? That's for sure. And that you are setting themselves up to have really like healthy mechanisms for like how they cope with with new environments, how they see themselves, how they interact and work with other young people. And then you bring in the parents, which, there's so many anxieties for like a new parent of like, am I doing this right? Am I scarring this child? Like what's the purpose of all of this? and the kind of like reassurance that you're able to give for what they're doing right, and then strict guidance of like this is backed by studies, and I suggest you to try this and following up with them on that, and making it clear that they build this momentum moving forward with their child. It just sounds so um, yeah, it's so needed. And I love that you bring in the example of New Zealand, right? Because you're like, I mean, look at what they're doing, right? That's the perspective of getting out of a comfort zone of like, well, let's just kind of continue operating how it's been done, and yet far away, right? You see that the way that they put a value on their teachers engaging with this population is so different. And yeah,
And I also can't help but feel often that these children that we care for now will be taking care of us, when we are old. And when I see teachers who maybe don't respect children or childhood itself, I just can't help but think those are the people that will be moving the future, So it's really like my responsibility to respect and guide and care for the very, very earliest children, the most vulnerable that often don't have a voice, to be able to really um, share who they are. And that's another reason why I really feel passionate about early childhood.
yeah, I'm starting to feel really passionate about early childhood right now. Like, wow, yes, let's go. Um, Yeah, it's yeah, so important. So I really appreciate you sharing that. And you are, do you think that like in your interactions with these young learners and also your teachers that you're able to convey in some way, shape, or form like these ideals of global citizenship that we've been talking about? I mean, you don't have to go into too much of detail, but like, do you feel like can you see some connecting points to like what we've been talking about? And do you feel like it might help to kind of bring them even more to the light? Like, is there any kind of like mission statement at the school that says, "Hey, global citizenship," or do you think it's something that you just kind of bring out from your own life and it's more natural?
We don't, and our organization doesn't particularly have a kind of mission necessarily related to global citizenship, but I feel that when I talk to teachers one on one and we have like trainings that, I've helped to facilitate trainings, we are able to draw out all of these sort of aspects of, how their childhoods were, teachers. And sometimes that recognizing the aspects that maybe were traumatic for teachers, or even joyful, are really influencing how they work with children. Having those conversations bring about all of the global, we have different global values, but we come back to how can we be the best teacher guider, for the children that we work with. And we also have to grow alongside the children. We don't know everything. Like the children aren't just learning from us, we are learning from them daily, and it's like a side by side, hand in hand, like kind of walking towards learning and understanding, you know um as well. So I think for me, again, prior in the beginning of the conversation, like again, it's the trust, one-on-one conversations where teachers feel they can be vulnerable with me after I've built a relationship with them. And I think that's kind of, where global citizenship comes. We share our cultures, we share our backgrounds, and we try to be better and to really work with the next generation.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And I would say it may be helpful. It's just a suggestion to introduce this kind of like vocabulary of like, just adding on what you're already doing and building that trust and really connecting to people's humanities, but also saying like, what's the objective with this? And what you said about these these young learners are going to grow up and be taking care of us when we're older. And so there's this long-term perspective that we also have to always keep in mind as educators, as parents, right? As families and communities. But I think that the scope of time that we're working with and the urgency of what's happening on our planet right now might warrant this kind of, identifier of like, hey, like let's take action and kind of group together these various attributes that we've been practicing and embodying for our students and for ourselves, but really step into a role of like, let's be global citizens. So anyway, that's my suggestion.
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
Awesome. That's amazing. Well, yeah, this has been such an amazing conversation. I think it's so clear, like the through line with all of this, we can say is trust, but always coming from this like heart space of like really seeing the humanity and the great potential of these young learners, and the sense that we're all works in progress. So as teachers, as parents, as just a regular adult, we're we're tasked with this project of really reforming ourselves and kind of coming to terms with how we were taught when we were young and seeking a better version of ourselves. And so the sooner that we can have those tools and have that confidence, the better. So you definitely sold me, Lisa, to this idea of why early childhood is so vital. And yeah, and the fact that it all ties back to your own mother, it just feels like the perfect bow on this journey of yours as an educator. So in light of this conversation that we've been having, I like to ask a kind of final question, and this comes in the form of either a book recommendation or a movie or film recommendation. It could be something that you've recently watched or read or something that you just always go back to. But is there anything that you'd like to recommend to the listeners out there?
At this point, I'm reading a lot for school. So it's mostly school material in my mind. Um, but there, yeah, I think right now I don't quite have a recommendation.
And that's totally okay. Yeah, we gotta be honest with ourselves because we're both in a grad program that is very demanding with our full-time jobs. So yeah, but I think that it's something that the conversation that we had really illustrates so many of these important points. And yeah, we covered a lot of terrain as well with like your travels, your teaching experience, your own childhood. So it definitely leaves us with a lot of food for thought. So don't worry about the recommendation part. That'll come later. So it's like I said, been a joy to learn more about your story, Lisa. I really appreciate you taking this time to be here with us all. And I wanted to give the last word to you. So any final thoughts that you might have, or just a kind of send off for the listeners, I want you to have the last word.
I think as I mentioned, like I really want to be moving forward in my career and really want to be an individual that helps teachers and helps teachers to feel how important their profession is and to bring them confidence the way that various mentors brought me confidence. So I think that that's the main thing that I'd like to leave with.